morning, Barnard. I'm Rona Wilk, class of 1991 and former AABC reunion chair. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third edition of Morningside Memories, Alumni Tell It Like It Was, a series of interviews with alumni from the 40s and 50s to learn about their Barnard experience in the years during and directly following World War II. We'll be releasing a new video every morning of Reunion 2023. Today, we are speaking with Muriel Fox from the class of 1948, who is celebrating her 75th reunion. Muriel spent her childhood in Newark, New Jersey, but in her last year of high school, the family moved to Miami Beach, Florida, and she spent 2 years at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, before transferring to Barnard. She majored in American Studies here, and her classmates wrote this about her in the mortarboard. Muriel Fox. Socially inclined, Muriel enjoys being in a crowd and likes having people around her. Gay, spirited, she is aiming to be a writer, perhaps a labor columnist. Has already had newspaper experience, was art critic and wrote a society column for the Miami Daily News, also did general news coverage for UP. Crazy about poetry by Shelley, and gets excited whenever anyone mentions the Dodgers. And though she did not become a newspaper reporter, she did go on to have a path-breaking career in public relations and played a pivotal role in the second wave feminist movement as one of the co-founders of and publicist for the National Organization for Women. And we are thrilled and delighted to have her here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I guess I'd like to just start at the very beginning. I mean, you had grown up in the metro area, obviously, but you already had 2 years under your belt at Rollins College, which is a co-ed school. So what drew you back to New York, and why? You know, there are a lot of colleges in New York City. So what brought you to Barnard?
Well, first of all, I felt that Barnard was the best. In those days, we still really had non-co-ed colleges, and Barnard was one at the very top of the big 7 women's colleges. In those days, we weren't co-ed, so I wanted to be the best. There was no question of that. And but also it was New York City, and of course I wanted to be part of New York, and I still am, and I'm grateful for it.
Very nice. Did you notice differences immediately when you got on campus from your previous 2 years at Rollins?
Yes, Rollins was a wonderful small school. The truth is, it was wonderful, but I really used up all the interesting courses in 2 years, and I needed a big campus. And that's not only Barnard, but of course, it's being able to use Columbia's facility.
So now, did you live on campus, or did you live with family that was still in the area?
I lived in Brooks Hall. At first, I couldn't get into Barnard. It was right after the war, and it was very hard even to get admitted, let alone to find housing. So I lived with someone, and that's a long story. And Professor Barnard, who was my English teacher, took me in hand and said, "Oh, you poor thing, I'm going to get you into Brooks Hall." And she got me into Barnard, and she rescued me, in fact. And also, I'd say she rescued me by entering me into the first American Studies class at Barnard, and that was very, very special.
I was going to say, American Studies was a very new discipline at the time. So I was curious how you came to choose that over sort of a more traditional English major or what have you.
Right, it combined everything good you want to take.
Fabulous. Now, speaking of Elizabeth Barnard, she had a great connection with the then president or dean of Barnard, Virginia Gildersleeve, and you arrived literally right at the transition moment of Dean Gildersleeve's last year and then Millicent McIntosh's first year. Do you have any remembrances of either of those two ladies or the shift between them?
Well, again, I was very proud of being at the college of Dean Gildersleeve. She was a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. She was active in the formulation of the United Nations, and she was one of the old style, I'd say, spinster heroines of women's history. And then Millicent McIntosh was a very different kind of person. She was a mother, she had a lot of children, but she managed to have a stellar career at the same time. So she set a different idealistic target for
And
Barnard.
we'll talk about your career a little bit later, but in some ways, you yourself ended up sort of embodying Mrs. McIntosh's ethos of having a career, having children, and a family, not necessarily at the same time, she used to say, but going that route. So let's go back to academics. Obviously, you were in this new discipline. Did you have any favorite professors, favorite classes that stand out? I know you said that at Rollins you had exhausted all the really good stuff. So what piqued your interest once you hit Barnard?
Well, I have to say something about Professor Greet. He was an English professor, and I took his Chaucer course, and he asked me, he happened to be assigned to sign me up as an advisor, and he said, "Why did you sign up for the Chaucer course?" I didn't know it was his, and I said, "Oh, it was the right time in the morning," but which was very unfriendly thing to say. And it was my favorite course at Barnard. And he was funny and witty, and I learned so much from that course, which just shows you Barnard was full of surprises. You never know what course is going to be your favorite.
That is very, very true.
Remember Professor Williamson in American history, again, made it all come alive. And so much depends on the professor.
That is true. That is very true. Now you were back in New York City. Did you take advantage of the city? Were there favorite spots on campus or in Morningside Heights that you recall enjoying?
Well, I signed up for the Columbia Barnard new radio station, WKCR, which I think is still going strong.
It is still going strong. And I do want to talk to you about that, because radio in and of itself was still relatively young in the late 40s. I mean, it had been around for 20 odd years, but it had only really exploded as a mass media in the 30s. And as someone who was so devoted to print, I was really curious why you gravitated towards the radio station.
Well, it was a source of news, and also they let me be news editor, and I was very much interested in being a journalist, so I was news editor, which I think meant I wrote newscasts for every day. I did not deliver them. I don't remember who was the announcer, but I wrote them, and was very proud of that. And so that enabled me to continue my search for a journalist career. I also dated the Columbia men, and we had our social activities, and we were part of New York City and went to concerts and movies and theater, and it was all very, very exciting. And we were part of New York, which I think was so important for me, and still would be, I think, for any young person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely part of what still draws, I think, people to Barnard today. So was there ever a question that you would go to college after high school?
There was never any doubt that I would go to college. I mean, that was very much understood. I might also say that in Jewish homes of that time, and I think today, it's understood that you're going to go to college and you're going to do well and you're going to get all A's, or your parents are going to say, "Why did you get that B in gym?" That was part of our mystique. But
right. Did you also have to take a swimming test?
Yes, I did take the swimming test, but I came from Rollins College in Florida, so swimming was no problem.
Excellent. So, I mean, obviously, later on in the 60s, you would go on to be an incredible part of the second wave feminist movement. Were you, while you were still at college, were you involved in politics? Were there social issues that resonated on campus that you were either reporting on or that you felt drawn to?
I wasn't aware of that, actually, or that wasn't my particular thing. Before that, I had already, when I was in Florida, joined the Workers' Defense League, and which was very much involved in civil rights. And that was still a time when we really felt that a woman could not get any other job except as a secretary. And I must say that the Barnard vocational department was not very helpful. They just assumed we better learn shorthand if we wanted a job when we came out. So those were still bad times, really for women. But at the same time, we knew that we were part of Barnard, and we were excellent, and we had a long tradition of excellent Barnard women, and that was certainly something to look forward to. But I'd say my politics came when I got out, and after my first year, I was in advertising, and then I came back to New York, and all the newspapers were folding at that time. They were all amalgamating and joining together, and there were no newspaper jobs. So that's why I got into public relations. But those were times when I was just constantly told, well, we don't hire women, so of course you can't have that job, or you can't even think about it. And it was a time when Time and Newsweek only allowed women to be researchers, even if they had sterling history as college graduates. Only the men could be reporters. And we just took it for granted in those days. It wasn't until a little later, this was 1948 when I graduated, and now was founded in 1966. So that's a lot of years hearing people say we don't hire women until 1966. And then, of course, we all were involved with the civil rights movement. And then we began saying, well, why don't we have those rights for women? And many years later, when I said to Betty Friedan, well, don't we want an organization? She said, you mean an NAACP for women? And that's what we all wanted. And that was 1966, that now was founded as the NAACP for women.
And we are so grateful to that. Now, you met Betty Friedan because you invited her to come and speak.
Right. I invited her. I was active in American Women in Radio and Television in my public relations work. And I invited her to speak. The Feminine Mystique had just come out in 1963. And of course, I was fascinated by the book. And I sent her a thank you note after her speech. And I said, if ever you want to start an organization, I'll help with the public relations. So I was on her Rolodex, which was very big. And in 1966, I got one of her form letters telling me about the formation of NOW. And I immediately said, yes, I'll join, and send me 200 applications. I'll send them to my friends and American Women in Radio and Television.
That's fantastic. And I know you're not only you, but your husband and your brother also got involved as allies, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. My husband, Dr. Shepard Aronson, was the first chair of the board of New York Now. And when we were at cocktail parties and people would say, Shep, what are you doing in the women's movement? And he would say, I want my wife to make more money.
I have to say, I'm actually, when I sort of realized that you did not take your husband's name in that, or at least professionally, you didn't take your husband's name. You remained Muriel Fox.
That's right.
And that was, I assume, a conscious decision on your?
Well, actually, when we got married, my first letterhead at Carl Bayer, I was a vice president then at my public relations agency, said Muriel Fox Aronson. So I actually did change, but then I found I lost my last name. And I'd be at a meeting and they'd say, this is Bill Toomey and Bob Wood and Mrs. Aronson. I can't believe that. That's what they did.
Yeah.
I was losing my name and losing my identity. And so I had new stationery printed from Muriel Fox.
Because the standard procedure was you used the husband's name with Mrs. So instead of the woman's actual first name, one little bit of erasure.
In the New York Times, I was listed as Mrs. Shepard Aronson.
Yep. Yep. And speaking of the Times, you were also instrumental in getting employment notices in newspapers desegregated by sex.
One of Now's earliest victories, though it took us many years, was to get the help wanted ads desegregated. Today's young women can't believe that the ads used to say help wanted male, help wanted female. They just, how did we put up with that? Well, we just accepted it in those years. And then, of course, after the founding of Now, we stopped accepting it and we said it's against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it took us many years to prove that it was illegal, but we did. We picketed. We had lawsuits, a lot of public relations, personal appearances, everything. A lot of pressure before the newspapers finally dropped it. And incidentally, the reason the newspapers kept help wanted male, help wanted female so long was because that way they would get two ads. In other words, an employer would put an ad in help wanted male and also another one help wanted female, so they'd make more money. That was interesting. So we had to fight that.
I hadn't thought about that. That actually, yeah. Going back to your first few jobs when you actually got into public relations, because I think some of us have this image of sort of the Mad Men era of New York in that period, and the glass ceiling that came along with that, because they told you at your public relations firm that you could only go so high at the time.
Well, I first applied to Carl Bayer, which at that time was the largest PR agency in the world. I had a very good scrapbook and a good introduction to the executive vice president. And he said, this is very impressive, but we don't hire women writers. And sorry. And so I went away. I accepted it. I mean, that was how life was in those days. And I got another PR job. But then someone told me a few months later, well, there's an opening at Carl Bayer in the radio television department. And I said, they don't hire women. He said, well, go talk to the head of this department. He's very enlightened, which he was. And he hired me. And then, but there was a man who was there who earned a lot more money than I did. He was more experienced and he was a man. But then my boss had an ulcer and was hospitalized for quite a while. And I sort of took over the department. The man there went home on the 5 o'clock train to Westchester County. And so I sort of took over. And so when the boss was made head of all the departments and they decided who they're going to give the job to, I was astounded. I was terrified that they gave the job to me as head of the department.
Excellent.
And then
I love that, though.
Years later, I became the youngest vice president at Carl Bayer, but the CEO said to me, well, Muriel, we love you. You're wonderful. You're doing so well, but you've gone as far as you can go because naturally CEOs can't relate to women. So we can't go any further than that.
Can you talk a little bit about where you think the women's movement has gone? You're still involved with it, if I'm not mistaken? You know, what do you see? I mean, I think a lot of us, even my age, look around and go, wait, we're still fighting these fights. We have to go back to get our rights again. Any words of encouragement or wisdom that you can offer us?
Well, first of all, I have to say we did it. I mean, just look, after thousands of years, finally we changed the world in our lifetime. So it's possible. Betty Friedan emphasized that now is the national organization for women, not of women, because we had men like my husband, men like my brother, and many other wonderful men who were fighting also for equality for everybody's sake, for their sons as well as for their daughters.
Yeah. Well, as a child of Free to Be You and Me, and you know, Marlo Thomas's project, I heartily agree with all of that. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us and for joining us here today.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you and proud to be a Barnard alumna. And I hope the people who are watching will consider that we passed the torch to them and they've got a lot of work to do.
And on that note, thanks for joining us. We will have another episode of Morningside Memories to come. Thank you.